Brent Hubbs from VolQuest is talking his favorite game, and he has chosen the 2022 Alabama-Tennessee game. But it was one of three finalists. And before we get into that game, before we get into the Hendon Hooker and the Bryce Young of it all, let's talk about the other two finalists that didn't make it, because I think they were both kind of program-defining wins. And one of them specifically, I think, is very similar to the one that Brent chose. So, Brent, you had the 95 Alabama-Tennessee game, the 98 Florida-Tennessee game, and then obviously 22 Alabama-Tennessee. So 95 Alabama-Tennessee. Why is that one such a big deal in Tennessee lore?
Well, because it ended a streak in Legion Field. It was Peyton Manning's true coming out party. That's Peyton Manning versus Brother Oliver, who was a defensive guru at that time. Tennessee scores on play number 1. Driving down I-59 to that game, Tennessee fans looked up and saw the number 9 on every bridge. Tennessee had a tie game, which was like, kissing your mother in 93, because Tennessee outplayed them and David Palmer had a 2-point conversion. And you kind of had this, was Tennessee ever going to beat Alabama? When was it ever going to happen? And that for Phillip Fulmer was a major milestone win, because at Tennessee, listen, as Doug Dickey once said, you're paid to win 3 games: Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. And for a longtime Tennessee fans, Andy, it's the Alabama game. And that one solidified Fulmer, who also almost went to Alabama from Winchester. There was a lot of natural ties there, but that slayed the dragon in 95 and was a major milestone win. And kind of, that was a plant the flag win. And I think your question about best games is a really unfair question. I love you. You and I get along great, but it's a really unfair question.
I know.
Because is it the greatest game, or is it the greatest game because of its impact? And I can find games that were really better games, probably, Andy, but they didn't carry an impact because they didn't do anything with it. Think about where Tennessee's program went after the 95 season and what they evolved and became into. That was the planting of the flag to the national championship in 98. So to me, the 95 Alabama game has to be near the top, if not one of the top games.
Well, 98 Florida, like 22 Alabama, that was a really good game. That was a very exciting game, back and forth, and kind of similar to Alabama, and also similar to the other Alabama game we're going to talk about. It was an obstacle that Tennessee just had not been able to overcome. So the Vols beat Florida in 92, which is the first year of divisional play, but Florida ended up winning the East. And then Florida beats Tennessee 93, 94, 95, 96, 97. The 97 game, Tennessee ends up winning the SEC that year, but Peyton Manning had a bad game in the swamp. Tony George had the 89-yard interception return for a touchdown. So it's 98. Peyton Manning's gone. The roster is good, but it's not like I feel like everybody thought 99 was going to be the year. That was when everybody was going to be at full power. And turned out roster's pretty damn good in 98. And Florida comes in and it's back and forth. It goes to overtime. Collins Cooper misses that field goal in over. I thought, so I'm a student reporter at this point. And then obviously I'm a lot of those guys are former teammates at that point. And Collins' locker was like 3 down for my freshman year. And he misses the kick. And I thought the press box was going to shake off the foundation when he missed that kick. And I remember weaving my way through the fans on the field, because I had to go interview people in Florida's locker room. And it was just like, that's as big of a party as I think I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, that one was, and to give context to that team a little bit, I go back to fall camp of 98. And I watched Tennessee scrimmage. This was back when Coach Fulmer had open scrimmages. They had a night scrimmage like the day before classes started or 2 days before classes started. It was kind of the end of camp big scrimmage. I watched Tennessee that night. Andy, I'm not sure they made a first down. And so, I mean, you've seen Peyton Manning play for 4 years, and it's this offense, and it's going all over the place. And you're sitting there and you're watching them going, you know what? That they may not. I mean, they may win 6, 7. I mean, 6, 7 games. Get to a bowl game is pretty good. What you didn't realize at that point, when you watched that team scrimmage, you didn't have the sense of how far the defense had come in that offseason. And I've talked to a bunch of former players, defensive players, who talked about the lesson they learned from playing Nebraska in the Orange Bowl the year before, which would have been the 98 Orange Bowl, but it was after the 97 season. And they got manhandled. I mean, the Nebraska Army, Andy, comes marching out of the tunnel, and it's like, and I got down there to cover that.
A lot of those guys on that Florida team could have told you the same thing about getting a lesson from Nebraska that led to a national title.
Yeah. I mean, I got to Miami to cover that bowl game like on the 26th. And I remember vividly asking Scott Frost, what did you guys do for Christmas? Because they'd been there a week because they got them out of Nebraska. He goes, oh, we had a 100-play scrimmage Christmas morning. And I was like, oh, now Tennessee's not ready for this. Tom Osborne's last game. The point being, after they got handled in that game, there was a monumental shift in off-season training, particularly for the defensive guys. And there was a core group of guys who like Peyton Manning. Al Wilson likes Peyton Manning. Fred White, they all like Peyton, but they were really tired of it being the Peyton Manning show. And they wanted to prove that they were a good program without Peyton Manning. And they had a chip on their shoulder, and they carried it through the summer. They can't score in fall camp, and you're like, okay, they're not any good. They go to Syracuse and kick a field goal at the end of regulation to win 34-31. And you're thinking, man, this team's not very good. But then you go back and look, and Syracuse has got Donovan McNabb, Marvin Harrison, Quentin Spockwood. They're pretty good, Yeah. And so Florida comes to town, and you're like, can they even find a way to score? And it was hard, but that defense was unbelievable that night. I mean, Deion Grant's
and Peerless Price making a huge catch.
Yeah. I mean, it was one of those, I don't want to say destiny things, but it was one of those deals. I mean, Tennessee gave up 500 yards of offense, but they were terrific in the red zone. They forced, 3 fumbles. Al Wilson had a 3-fumble night. Raynoch Thompson picked up a fumble right at the goal line, which saved a touchdown. They popped the Sean Bryson play. I mean, that was, again, a slay the dragon moment, right? Here's Steve Spurrier, who has mouthed off about Tennessee. For Tennessee fans, he's the villain. You're never going to beat him, and finally, in an improbable way, because it was not the team expected to beat him. The 97 team was. The 96 team, that was a 1 versus 2 matchup in Neyland Stadium. And it was
and that game started at 29-0 Florida.
Yeah, I mean, they or
35-0 Florida.
Yeah,
sorry.
That Florida converts on 4th and 19 on the first possession. You don't have your popcorn. You're not sitting down, and the game's over. And so this is the unlikely one that happened, but it set the course for Tennessee to go win the championship because they grew as the year went on. They weren't very good offensively. They got better as the season went along, and that defense and Al Wilson carried not only that night, but they carried the entire year.
Now let's get to the feature game here, which is also a slay the dragon situation, because
absolutely,
as much as Spurrier tortured Tennessee, and it's probably worse because Spurrier was torturing Tennessee when Tennessee was great. But Nick Saban running the most dominant program in college football history, and Tennessee having to be an annual rival, the cross-divisional opponent of that Nick Saban team. When Tennessee is going through some stuff, Brent Hubbs, like the wandering through the wilderness post Phillip Fulmer, at that point, you didn't know when it was going to end. Like I keep going back to when Jeremy Pruitt got fired and Josh Heupel got hired and everybody poured into the transfer portal. Like, I thought, oh God, when is Tennessee ever going to be able to come back? Well, this game was the moment Tennessee announced it was back. It was year 2 of Josh Heupel, year 2 of Hendon Hooker's starting quarterback, and Bryce Young, defending Heisman Trophy winner, is leading Alabama. Jahmyr Gibbs, future first-round draft pick. I mean, just that Alabama team's loaded. And they come into Neyland Stadium, and that was a plant the flag moment too, I think.
Oh, there's no question. And it was, again, I think those things, the 95 win at Alabama Tennessee was the better team. I I mean, and they were dominant in that game. Okay. 98, those two teams could have played 10 times, and I'm not sure how many of those Tennessee wins. The 22 Alabama game was improbable just because of how that team was assembled. I mean, Hendon Hooker had done it the year before, was learning this offense, but Jalen Hyatt, what he does, and Tennessee.
Cedric Tillman's hurt. That's the other part that people forget.
Absolutely, and it's one of those deals, Andy, where it was a Tennessee. When you walked out of the stadium that night, Tennessee had a brand and an identity back. If that makes sense, that they had found
absolutely
their brand, they had found their identity, and as a result of that, it changed the course of where Tennessee was and what Tennessee is under, and the expectations that are there for Josh Heupel now. I mean, it was that was the thing. I mean, I looked this up while we were sitting here talking because I wanted to get the stat. The previous 7 trips that Nick Saban had come to Neyland Stadium, Tennessee had been beaten by an average of 29 points by Alabama.
Wow.
Alabama had overtaken Neyland Stadium for 7 trips. I mean, they were dominating over Tennessee, and so to slay that dragon, to win that game, put Josh Heupel on the map at Tennessee. Hey, look here, they're real. Obviously, it got Jalen Hyatt up the draft board. It put Hendon Hooker in the Heisman race. It gave Tennessee such national relevance because they had went and beaten Nick Saban, and they had done it in their own brand and their own style of play. And it was like, okay, for Tennessee fans, it's like they're going to be a problem. I mean, it was going to be a problem. What's interesting to me about the reaction of those 2 games, and listen, I mean, Tennessee's administration is playing Dixieland Delight after the game, right? They poked the bear, But in 98, Andy, you were on that field. You were trying to get to the locker room as quick as you could because it was mass chaos. Like there was just people running, going everywhere. The euphoria at Alabama and the Alabama win in 22 was almost just more relief. There were mass amounts of people on the field, but there was nobody tore up a fence, nobody dug up turf. Like they just got on the field and like, we don't have to leave, do we? Like, can we just sit here and smoke our cigars? I mean, it was there was nothing chaotic about it. I mean, everybody was jubilant, everybody was happy, but it was just, almost like we can breathe now. It was a very different feeling in terms of intensity on the field after that game compared to the Florida game. And that's one thing. I don't know why that was the case, but that's one thing I'll always remember in comparing the 2 games, because I was on the field at the end of Florida. In fact, there's a video of me, like, I'm just like trying to not get bumped. I'm against the wall and I'm just trying to.
It was terrifying. Like people are running everywhere. Yeah.
In Alabama, you're just like, everybody's coming up, high-fiving each other. And finally, like the police were like, all right, we've given y'all an hour and a half on the field. Y'all can leave now. We got to quietly get people out. But it was just the most, I just want to soak it all in type moment. Which was really weird because both games ended, in dramatic fashion,
right? With a kick.
Level of intensity was very different. It was very, very odd between the 2.
Yeah. So let's set the stage here. So in this situation, Tennessee goes into the game 5-0. Alabama's 6-0. This is Tennessee's best start since 2016. Remember 2016, they beat Florida in Knoxville. They win the Dobnail boot game in Athens. The Hail Mary to beat Georgia in Athens. Then they have that double over.
Yeah, that game is on the list as potential top 5 single games, but it's not a plant the flag moment. The Dobnail boot
exactly.
Game.
They play an incredible double overtime game at Texas A&M. I was at that game as well. That was a crazy game. But it's what happens the week, and this is the difference. And I think it's interesting that Alabama scored 49 points in both of these games. 2016, Alabama, Tennessee. Tennessee is in control of the SEC East, despite losing Texas A&M. Doesn't even matter, really. They lose 49-10 to Alabama. That game is never close. It's never even in doubt for a second that Alabama is going to win that game. And that was sort of a, okay, you can maybe be the best team in the SEC East, but this is how far you have to go. And then Tennessee ends up losing to South Carolina, and then they wind up champions of life that season. So it's like that was a, oh no, we're still not out of this crap yet. 22, it was like, no, this is who we are. We can play with anybody now.
Yeah, and I think that was, and again, I give Josh Heupel credit. I mean, if you spend any time with Josh Heupel, you know the bigger the game, the happier he is. He doesn't like games where he's heavily favored. I mean, he relishes that moment. I think that's the competitor in him as a former quarterback. And the story of that game, if you look in the context of Tennessee with General Needham's maxims, think about it, Andy. They won all parts of it, right? I mean, they won the kicking game. They were the more physical team when you look at how they ran the football in that game. And the biggest thing about that game in 22 that gave you, if you cover this team or you're a fan of this team, or you're an observer of the SEC, where you said Tennessee might be different, they might be really turning the corner here, is when something bad happened in that game, they did not flinch. And they had the botched fumble that Alabama picks up and scores on a scoop and score for 6. And everybody in the stands, I don't care. You can come up to me anywhere you want to in the state of Tennessee and say, Hubbs, you're wrong. I don't believe that. I will not believe you that if you're in the stands that moment, you did not have a thought in your head about, here we go again.
Yes.
Here we
that
go
made
again.
It 49-42 Tennessee. Right. It was just a read option, and the back thought that Hendon Hooker was going to keep, and Hendon Hooker thought the back was going to, I can't remember which, if it was Small or who the back was on that play, but they got confused and the ball just drops. Dallas Turner picks it up and walks in, and it feels like the game's over.
Yep. It's like, here you go again, right? I mean, Tennessee's been there. That's the Mount Cody blocked field goal moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the moment where Tennessee turns it over, or they give up a big play like we've seen them do in games during the Butch Jones era, right? There's the moment. Okay, there it is. And Tennessee can't win the close when they haven't figured out how to win one of these games. Tennessee and Josh Heupel at that moment never flinched. Offensively, they got the ball back and they went and they answered immediately. And you said, you know what? Maybe Tennessee's a little different. And then on top of that, at the end of the game, after the missed field goal, they did not play for overtime. They simply said, let's go win now. We're going to keep attacking. And look, Josh Heupel had won the Florida game. They had been a team, Andy, that throws it. They're big plays, everything. This was different. This was, hey, they've got Nick Saban's defensive backfield twisted in knots, turned in knots. Alabama doesn't have answers for what Tennessee's doing. It was Hendon. I thought Hendon Hooker was great against Florida that year. It's a debate on which one he was better in, because he was terrific against Alabama. And to stand in there and make that throw to Brew McCoy to sign it up for the win.
The throw to Brew McCoy that sets up the field goal is probably the best play of Hendon Hooker and Brew McCoy's career so far.
Hendon Hooker made a play. Now, the moment was different, okay?
Yeah.
But if you go back 4 weeks earlier, whatever it was, when they played Florida, Billy Napier had called a timeout to try to get the ball back to extend a lead at the end of the first half, late in the first half. He had Tennessee backed up, had him on a third down, and there was a free blitzer, and Hendon Hooker slid to his left, and just an immediate reaction, and threw it to the tight end for a first down to move the sticks. They go on and score. Tennessee takes momentum into the second half, or in the locker room at the half. They win the quote, the middle eight.
The middle eight, yeah.
Coaches call that. That was a great Hendon Hooker play. But in that moment against Alabama, Again, you're trying to slay the dragon. You make that, you stand tall in the pocket, you throw the ball high, you know what I mean? You don't take the sack, you don't get the ball batted down. That was a terrific football play by those two guys. Great box out by Brew McCoy to make the catch. If he holds it a second and a half longer, you don't get the timeout called. You know, the clock's run out and you give yourself a chance to win the game. I mean, it's just one of those deals where everybody who's a Tennessee fan is going to remember exactly where they were when that play and the field goal took place. You'll never forget where you were.
So let's talk about the game plan itself, because this is the only time that offense, and I'm not talking about Tennessee's offense, I'm talking about this is the Art Briles Baylor offense. This is where it comes from. This is the only time any team running that offense, which would be Ole Miss right now, Tennessee right now, Baylor back in the day, Oklahoma the last couple of years, no team running that offense had beaten one of the super teams, had been able to beat Nick Saban or Kirby Smart or any of those. This is the first time anybody had been able to do it. And Heupel does it without his best receiver. Cedric Tillman was out. And he really did it by matching up Jalin Hyatt on players who couldn't keep up with Jalin Hyatt. And poor DeMarco Hellams in this game just got tortured, because basically Tennessee would go in motion in such a way that it would leave DeMarco Hellams sitting out there 20 yards off the line of scrimmage, and then having to deal with Jalin Hyatt coming roaring at him with a 20-yard running start, which even the fastest player in the world is going to struggle to cover Jalin Hyatt in that situation, and you've got a safety trying to do it. It was just brutal to watch for an Alabama fan, because it didn't feel like there was any answer Alabama had.
No, and look, I mean, Jalin Hyatt had made a couple of plays, but if you go back 3 or 4 weeks earlier, they're playing at Pittsburgh, and it was literally Hendon Hooker and Cedric Tillman playing one-on-one. I mean, I think Tillman had like 13 catches in that game. I mean, that was just, they won in overtime, and it was the only place they were going with the ball in the passing game was Cedric Tillman. And you came out of that going, all right, that's not going. You didn't know Tillman was going to get hurt, but you'd like, there's no way they're going to win a bunch of games if that's the only place and the only way they can throw the football. And so Hyatt starts to develop and he starts to come on. And obviously Tennessee found something. If you go back to 21, Andy, Tennessee's in the football game in Tuscaloosa. And a little side note to that story, if you go back and look at the film of that story, Tennessee played basically one side of the field because they were depleted at tackle, I guess it was right tackle. They were playing a walk-on at right tackle. And basically they said, you know what, we can't go that direction. So we've got to play one-handed the other way. But Tennessee got behind Alabama's secondary. Cedric Tillman had a big game. And Tennessee was in that game into the third quarter. Defensively, they couldn't get any stops, and they couldn't keep matching. You know, Hendon Hooker was beat up coming into that game, and he got beat up even more. But Tennessee, you walked out of there and went, okay, this offense can give Alabama some problems. And you thought, okay, Nick Saban's got an entire offseason to figure this out. You know, what are they going to come up with, and what are they going to do? And the fact of the matter is, Tennessee schematically had a couple things for them that they weren't anticipating, they weren't expecting. Obviously, Jalin Hyatt had a career day when you look at it. The unsung hero in that game was Ramel Keaton. You go back to the last drive, Keaton makes a really nice catch there. He's stepping in for Cedric Tillman. He's got 78 yards receiving in that game. You know, Brew McCoy only had 2 catches. Now, the last one was the biggest catch of his career and a catch in lore for Tennessee. But Tennessee runs for 182 yards in that game, averages nearly 5 yards a rush. That's the part of it that gets lost a little bit, and it gets lost in Josh Heupel's offense, Andy, is that they got to run the football. And Alex Golis said it to the television crew leading up to that game. He told me that week, he said, my biggest mistake from 21 is I didn't help us out enough because we didn't stay committed to trying to run the football. He did not get away from running the football in that game. So Alabama had to commit a little extra, and they got the safeties twisted up because they were effective enough running the football that you couldn't just play 7-on-7, if you will, on the back end.
So it's interesting because there's a moment late in the first half where it feels like Tennessee could have put it away, where Hooker misses Ramel Keaton on a deep ball on 4th down. That would have made it 35-17. Tennessee almost gets a Hail Mary at the end of the first half that would have been a touchdown also. But Jahmyr Gibbs, who was awesome in this game, scores to tie it. They get a 2-point and make it 28-all. And then this is where it could have been, Hyatt scores again. So they're up 34-28. But then Alabama scores because they're like McClellan scores. There's a holding call that nullifies it, but then Tennessee gets called for pass interference and Gibbs scores. So it's 35-34 Bama, and Hooker throws it right to DeMarco Hellams on the next possession. This is where I was thinking, that's it. And I'm sure there were a lot of fans in the stands going, okay, this is where Alabama just mushes us. But the D gets a stop, and you have the 78-yard catch and run for Jalen Hyatt, where he's just running away from all of Alabama's defense. And it's like, okay, track meets on again.
Well, I mean, a couple of things. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs was very interested in Tennessee. Tennessee didn't think he was an offensive player. Neither did anybody else in the SEC, by the way, when he came out of high school. But Tennessee wanted him to be a defensive back. That's why he went to Georgia Tech, because nobody in the SEC thought he was an offensive player. They thought he was a defensive guy. He was pretty good on offense. If you go back and look at the fourth quarter, I mean, his drop on Alabama's last offensive drive is the one that will haunt Alabama fans. Because if he catches that ball there, Tennessee doesn't get a chance at the end. Alabama's going to kick it to win it at the end of the game and break the 49-49 tie, and Tennessee's offense never gets back on the field. But that's the course of. I mean, that's football, and you're right. I mean, it was track meet back on, and it was one of those deals where if you're covering that game, if you're calling that game, if you're in the stands in that game, you're just like, if you can just get one stop, because they can't stop us. Alabama can't stop Hendon Hooker. They can't stop this offense. Just get the ball back, right? Limit them to a field goal. I mean, that's a win if they have to kick a field goal. By the way, the pass interference call against Tennessee was a bad call in that game at that point too.
Well, let's talk about pass interference calls. Because we have to. We cannot talk about this game without talking about the pass interference call that nullified the Kool-Aid McKinstry interception that allowed Tennessee to keep trying to drive for the game-winning field goal, or ultimately allowed Tennessee to get the ball. But Alabama actually does get a field goal attempt in there too. But let's talk about that particular play, because McKinstry intercepts it. The call's actually on Malachi Moore as he is trying to cover the receiver down the sideline. I don't have a problem with the call. I know every Alabama fan has a problem with the call, but it did really swing things.
Oh, it was a huge call. It's 4th and 5.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fourth down play.
It's a 4th down play, and Tennessee's down a touchdown. I mean, they've got to score there. They have to go. I mean, you can't kick a field goal because you're not going to have enough time there. I mean, I think there was contact. I mean, I think that. Listen, I mean, if the pass interference call against Tennessee on the ball that was just floated in the air, where everybody's trying to play the ball, was pass interference, then that call on the McKinstry interception is pass interference all day long. And Alabama, that was a frustrating deal for Alabama. One, because of the impact of that call, but two, that was the most penalized Alabama team Nick Saban had. And I mean, it was pass interference call after pass. They held, grabbed in the secondary, got called for it all year long, more than they had ever been called for it, which was a bone of contention for Nick Saban. I mean, that team, over 100 yards worth of penalties in multiple games, which was very uncharacteristic for them. That was a pivotal moment. I don't think it was a bad call, but I get if you're an Alabama fan, do you think it's a bad call? Hell yeah, you do. You think it's a disastrous call. Just like you think the other call against Tennessee for pass interference was a disastrous call. So That's the ebbs and flows of a college football game. It's what makes football great, but in particular college football great, because it's just a couple of plays here and there that are the difference in the game. And Tennessee made enough at the end. Alabama didn't make enough, and as a result, Tennessee fans feel like they sent Nick Saban into retirement. Now they really didn't, but they think that was the start of sending him, into retirement, and they got a chance to beat him in his final game in Neyland Stadium, just like Johnny Majors beat Bear Bryant in Bear Bryant's final game in Neyland Stadium. So there's some oozing in the tradition there in that rivalry for sure.
So we talked about the Brew McCoy catch already, but let me ask you this: if I told you before that game, it's going to come down to a Chase McGrath kick, and he's going to kick a knuckleball, what do you think's going to happen?
I mean, you're just sitting there. Here it is. I mean, can they execute it and get it done? Because again, I know I'm telling old stories, but I go back to the Mount Cody block kick, and I'm in the booth calling the game for the Vol Network, and Jim Chaney's to my right, and there's a bad set of blinds that are about half tore up, and Luke Stockner catches the ball, and basically Tennessee stops at that point and says, okay, we're going to kick it to win it. And it's like, it's a 45-yard kick. Like, we're sitting, I'm going, are you not going to run another play? And I'm just kind of shaking my head. And Jim Chaney's like, oh, no. He just looks over at me and kind of gives me, hey, just the relax deal. And I'm like, no. Sebastian Janikowski's not kicking this for Lane Kiffin here. This is not how it works. You need to be closer. And obviously the kick had no chance in that game. So you fast forward to 22, and there you are. Okay, here's Chase McGrath. He's got his opportunity. Can they complete this thing? I mean, they're finally knocking on the door. They've got a real chance. I mean, Butch Jones had the lead against Alabama in Tuscaloosa in the fourth quarter, couldn't get off the field. Tennessee had been somewhat close a couple of times and couldn't finish it. Could they actually finish it? They botched the protection up front, nearly get it blocked. I thought Nick Saban was going to call a second timeout. I think McGrath thought he was too, because McGrath actually kind of double hitches on his approach, and that was the most beautiful, ugly kick any Tennessee fan has seen in a long, long time, because it was ugly, but the result of it was obviously beautiful and euphoria for everybody in orange.
And credit to the CBS production crew. Our pal Craig Silver did such great work on those SEC games, and it's going to be weird this year not seeing that CBS broadcast. But so you see it's a great shot from behind Chase McGrath as it knuckles through the uprights, and then they go to the blimp shot of the orange pyro coming out of Neyland Stadium as the people pour onto the field. Like, it's iconic.
Yeah. I mean, listen, if you're in production or you're calling a game as a broadcaster or whatever, you don't know when those moments are going to come when you start the day. But when the moment's there, can you capture it either verbally or visually? And CBS and Brad Nessler and the production of it, I mean, captured the end of that game beautifully. I mean, it's simple, but and here they come, and there's people coming everywhere, and it's the orange fireworks, and it's just that it was beautiful. I mean, it was terrific production. Anybody that knows anything about video production, you just tip your cap and say, well done, because when the moment is there, you don't want to butcher the moment or botch the moment or miss the moment. And man, they were spot on, and they were spot on visually, which is not the easiest thing to do. Whoever's sitting there as a director, Craig Silverno guy going, let's go to the overhead blimp shot in the dark, because we just know these fireworks are going to hit just at the right time. I mean, they just hit the moment perfectly, Andy. They really did.
Yeah, and I feel like it was Tennessee hitting the moment perfectly, because this was a game Tennessee needed. This was a game that the entire fan base needed. It had been a long walk through the wilderness at that point, and it felt like that was them saying, "We're back."
Yes, because you could not walk. Look, that we talked about the misplays here, questionable call here, whatever. There's no way, and Nick Saban, to his credit, didn't. Nobody walked out of there going, "Man, that was the luckiest win ever. That was such a fluke."
Right.
And listen, we have upsets through the years where they're flukes, right? I mean, Doug Flutie throwing the ball 78 yards, 45 years ago or whatever it is now, that's a fluky play, right? I mean, Hail Marys are just luck. I mean, in a lot of ways. There's nothing fluke about this game when you look at how Tennessee won. They overcame adversity late. They made the plays that they had to make down the stretch. They were physical. They ran the football. Alabama did not push them around. They couldn't bully Tennessee. And all the notion about the finesse of Josh Heupel and the finesse of what Tennessee was, there was nothing finesse about the win, and there was nothing fluky about the win, which is why everybody looks at that game as a plant the flag moment, as a, hey, Tennessee's back, Tennessee's arriving. Josh Heupel's really building something here. This is not the, goofy offense or Mickey Mouse offense or whatever you want to label it as. This is an offense that works, and it works in this league. And if you're going to prove that it works, you got to go beat the big boys. And they went and beat Alabama that day to prove that, you know what? Put us in the conversation, because we're not just a fluky little offense that plays 7-on-7 while everybody else is playing big boy ball, because we can play big boy ball too.
Very well said, Brent. Very well said. And I will recommend, now Alabama fans don't bother doing this, so I'm not going to torture you with this, but anybody else, Tennessee fans obviously probably do this once a month. But if you just love college football and you miss college football right now, that game's on YouTube. Just watch it. You will rekindle your joy and your love for college football pretty much immediately. It is just, the drama is perfect. The twists and the turn, like, it starts at a breakneck pace and it kind of slows down a little bit, and then it just goes into like whiplash mode at the end. It is about as fun of a college football game as you'll ever watch. Again, Alabama fans, I understand if you don't want to watch it. Everybody else, like, go ahead and you're going to get fired up that college football is coming back and that Alabama's going to be playing at Neyland Stadium again this season. And I can't wait to see it. Brent, thank you so much.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it, man.